Hi there, it's Jeff
and Cassandra
from RV Parenting, and today we're going to talk about the 10 things that surprised us the most in buying a new RV and then heading out for a month. And these are things that if you're a new RV owner, you're going to want to know what these things are because they're not necessarily intuitive. We didn't think of these things before we headed out.
Yeah, it was kind of like, oh, trial and error, and we're adults, so sometimes it's a little bit challenging to learn new habits, and you definitely have to pick up different habits when you're traveling on the road. The number one thing that I noticed the most for myself was dishwashing. I'm not a huge clean up the kitchen kind of person anyway. I love to cook. I love to make yummy treats. However, the dishwashing is not really something I enjoy doing. And with an RV, you don't always get a dishwasher. I know some models have them. Ours did not come with one.
Hey, ours did come with one.
Jeff does share a lot of the brunt of that one, but it was surprising at how many dishes people go through, just like simple snacks, like, oh, I'm going to have a sandwich and some chips. Well, that's 5 plates in of a family of 5. And he times that by 3, that's 15 plates in one day. So it gets up there. The mountains climb.
And even though we have a 34-foot Class A RV with a decent sized kitchen, it's still a relatively small amount of space to be washing and drying dishes. We got a drying mat and a little dish drain, and but that takes up the majority of the counter space.
That takes up all the counter space. Like that was it. It's like sink and then dish drain. That's it.
So just think about that. You're going to want to minimize the number of dishes that people use. Maybe, reuse cups and plates for things unless they're super messy, things like that.
And I think it's okay to treat yourself to paper plates. It's like, okay, on like going out to eat, it's like, I'm going to cook, but tonight, guys, we're using plastic forks and paper plates. Like, you don't want to do it all the time, but, every once in a while, I think it's a good treat.
The next thing that surprised me was how outdated a lot of RV campground websites were. Honestly, and I've talked about this in other videos, she knows it's one of my pet peeves. But a lot of their websites, they're not mobile friendly. You're gonna have to do that thing where you make it larger on your phone to see. Most of them don't allow you to book reservations on their website. You have to call, and of course, they keep bankers hours, a lot of these places, so you have to call like Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 to book a campground, in some cases at least. So it surprised me how outdated a lot of campground websites were. And then once we got to those campgrounds, it also surprised me how poorly the Wi-Fi worked in many of those campgrounds. Not all, we did find a few gems.
Yeah, there were some good ones.
But overall, don't expect a great experience in booking your campgrounds online, and don't expect great Wi-Fi when you get there.
And I think for most people, that's okay. The whole point of getting an RV is like, we're going to check out for a little bit. We're not going to be, getting on our laptops. But for Jeff and I, it's crucial to our survival between my school and his work. I mean, we just have to have Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm. And luckily for us, we decided to change our phone companies so we could do a lot of tethering and get some decent data size limits on tethering, and so that was a great option when we didn't have good Wi-Fi. And we do have another video that talks about in greater detail about Wi-Fi and tethering and what you should experience
or
and plan
hotspot.
for.
Tethering always throws me for a loop. It's hotspot. It's 2020, Jeff.
All right, sorry. But we do have another video. I'll link to that down in the description below if you want more detail on how we make that work.
Number 3 on our list of things that we were kind of surprised by was like, oh, we'll just drive and drive and drive. Well, you can't just drive and drive and drive a 34-foot, 20,000 pounds mobile. You just can't do that the same way that you would a car. You get in your car like, oh, I'm going to drive 16 hours straight. You can't do that on an RV. So we learned the hard way that you want to do maybe 6 or 7 hour trips, stop for 2 to 3 days in your location, and then drive another 7 hours in a day. It was really stressful driving 2 days back to back, 7 hours each day. So that was definitely, that did not make for a happy family of 5. We were not happy campers when we had to do back-to-back trips.
And our best experiences were when we went somewhere and we stayed like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
That's even better because then you're living in your RV. You're not just traveling in your RV.
So like this summer, we have a trip coming up where, we're going to drive through. We're going to stop one night to get to Santa Fe, and then we're going to stay in Santa Fe for 4 or 5 days. And we find that is just more pleasant. It makes the journey more exciting when you get to enjoy the scenery that you're in. You get a bit of a jet lag when you're traveling on the road, or it's like, where am I? What day is it? Is the sun coming up or is it going down? So definitely kind of allow yourself time to stop for a few days before you hit up the next destination. Don't push too hard. Life is about the journey. It's not the destination.
And speaking of challenges while driving, I think one of the things, I do all the driving in our RV. And again,
I appreciate that.
As we've said, it's a 34-foot Class A RV. I'd driven RVs before. We've rented them a few times before we bought ours. But I was surprised at... This one is taller and longer than anything we've rented before, so I was surprised at how it's affected by wind, for instance, when we were driving through Oklahoma. There are very few trees, very easy for the wind to just roll across the plains and bop into us, so that I could feel the wind when it was windy outside, moving the RV back and forth. 18-wheelers, when they were passing us, almost create this kind of suction vacuum that pulled us over, and I got to where I would look in the mirrors and see if one was about to pass us, and then I would kind of anticipate and compensate for that, because it did catch me off guard the first several times it happened. Of course, rain, which we tried not to drive much through in rain, but we did hit some in Florida. Stopping, braking distance, all of that kind of stuff that you take for granted in a car is going to be very, very different in an RV, and of course we want to be safe. A Class A is not as safe as a passenger vehicle. There are no airbags. We've got a decent wheelbase, which is what they measure safety on in Class A RVs, but it's still very challenging to drive and to drive safely. And so you really want to think about those things. I would do some practice runs if you're brand new to it. Go short distances and just kind of test it out. Of course, parking can be a real challenge too. That's why we always looked for pull-through sites at the campgrounds, but we didn't always find that. Luckily, our RV has both side cameras and a backup camera, but that helps a lot. Those challenges really surprised me a little bit.
If you white knuckle it for the first few trips, that's okay. Like, give yourself that grace period of white knuckling and embrace it. That's just part of what your experience is going to be like, because it's harrowing. I mean, the look on Jeff's face sometimes, like, ooh, I'm glad that's not me.
And I actually had to actively remind myself to not be so tense gripping the wheel, because then you're exhausted by the time you get to your campground.
You get off and you're like, ugh.
So I did have to remind myself to, like, all right, I can do this. I'm good. And just relax a little bit, breathe a little bit. By the end of our first 30-day trip, I was doing great. But that first week or so was surprisingly harrowing in some places.
So that brings us to number 5 on our list of surprises in the RV, and that was travel time is longer. I know that in some cities, people talk about blocks. When you're out in the country, you talk, how long is it going to take me to get there? Doesn't matter if it's 40 miles, is it going to take me 20 minutes to get to where I'm going? And so that's RV life. Our kids would ask, how long to the next stop? Well, on Google Maps, it's telling me 5.5 hours. In reality, that's going to be more like 7 hours, possibly even 7.5 hours. And the reason behind this, speed. Sure, your speed limit in Texas can sometimes get to 80 miles per hour. Your RV is not going to get up to 80 miles per hour, especially if you're towing along a vehicle. How fast would you say you're able to go on those highways?
I mean, I generally went about 5 miles below the posted speed limit just to be safe. If the speed limit was 75, which it often is here in Texas, I was doing 70 because curves and bends in the road that a car can take at 75, I don't want to take in a 34-foot RV. So generally I was going about 5 miles an hour below the posted speed limit.
It felt a lot slower than that. I don't care what he said.
No, it wasn't always that, A lot of times it was a 55 mile an hour speed limit and I was going 50, so.
And expect when you're going for New Mexico is really tricky because you don't realize you're going on an uphill. So when you think, oh, why am I not going, 65? Because your RV is actually going up. You just can't feel it. So that happened one time we were driving a Class C that we had rented. As I was pushing the gas as hard as I could, but I still wasn't getting much momentum. And that's the sneaky hills of New Mexico. Something else to consider is the stops, filling up an 80-gallon tank, getting kids out of an RV, getting puppies out of an RV. It's like, oh, we can finally break free and, free range around, whatever convenience store or gas station we're at. So that adds time. Now, a gas stop that should take about 10 minutes total usually takes us about 30 minutes just to kind of get out of our space for a little bit. So you want to stop a little bit more when you have an RV. I feel like there's just I don't know, it's different with a car. You can just get in and go, but with all the space in an RV, you still, I don't know, jet lag, I guess.
And speaking of gas stations, that was another thing that really surprised me. A lot of gas stations aren't particularly RV friendly in terms of being able to pull up easily to the pump. And if there's a line of cars waiting to get to the pump, where do you sit in a 34-foot RV while you're waiting? Surprisingly, the overhangs that go over most gas stations always accommodated the height of our RV. So that wasn't really the challenge as much as the turning radius required to get into the driveway. And again, the line of cars waiting to get to a pump. And if I didn't want to wait there, how easy was it to whip around to one of the other pumps? And, and even some of the truck stops like Love's and those places weren't always great for this. There's a chain of stores in the South called Buc-ee's, and that was my best friend for filling up gas, because not only was it cheap, but they have dozens of pumps and it's easy to get in and out of Buc-ee's. So that was my best friend, but that really surprised me.
Yeah, and we, being in Texas, you think they would naturally love Buc-ee's. It really took us being on the road, and now we see a Buc-ee's like, oh, we can roam freely. There's grass, there's barbecue, there's easy access to gas. Yeah, Buc-ee's is a go-to place. And
if you haven't seen a Buc-ee's, it's a little bit like a Walmart mixed with, if you're older like me, you'll remember a chain of roadside stores called Stuckey's. So it's somewhere in between a Stuckey's and a Walmart.
But with barbecue. And number 7 on our list is no privacy ever. Oh my gosh. I did not think, I knew, hypothetically speaking, like, oh, we're going to be in an RV. Oh, we're going to be on the road for a month. We're going to be together all the time. This will be great. But we're together all the time, and it's not always great. There was literally nowhere to go. You can sit outside, but then the puppies want to come outside. The toddler wants to come outside. The husband wants to come outside. The teens don't want to come outside, so, they can be broody inside the RV. But there's literally nowhere to go. And the good news is that motivates you to walk. So if you need to decompress, have some alone time, meditate, forget about the road, forget about everything, that's where walks come in handy. But for husband and wives, when you want privacy, you have to work really hard on that at the road. So we did think of a clever thing of when we're going to be staying at campsites, we're going to intentionally park our RV next to a cabin and then treat ourselves to one night in those cabins, just the two of us, because you're not going to have privacy. You have to make your peace with that before you leave and have a contingency plan.
Another thing that surprised me was just dealing with the changing weather. And I don't mean like rain and wind like I talked about earlier. What I mean is that when we set out for our month-long trip this fall, we originally were going to head up to Yellowstone, and then by the time we actually were getting ready to leave, we realized it was a little too late in the season. A lot of the campgrounds up in New Mexico and Colorado and above were closing for the season because it was colder there than it was here in Texas. So we rerouted. We did go to Santa Fe, and then we headed east. We had some destinations booked and planned out, and other times we winged it, but we ended up spending a lot of time in Florida. So we packed clothes to be in New Mexico and Colorado, found ourselves mostly in Florida, where the weather was totally different. So we had a lot of long sleeve shirts, jackets, pants, and we didn't end up using.
And yes, that can happen. You can plan a trip to Colorado and end up in Florida. So just be, yeah.
And even if you do go everywhere you're planning to go, if you're going on a long trip to multiple destinations, you're going to have to think about what the weather's going to be like in each of those places, because you do have a finite amount of space to pack clothes. We did end up buying some more clothes, some spring weather clothes when we were in Florida, just because, who wants to wear long sleeves and a jacket when you're bumming around Florida when it's 85 degrees outside. But
California is a great example of this, because in San Francisco, Jeff took me there the first time I went was in July, and he's bringing sweaters and like jackets. I was like, what are you doing? It's July. And he's like, it's going to be cold. I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. So we get there. I had to buy a jacket. I had to buy some sweaters. I had to buy some pants because it is cold in San Francisco. But just outside of San Francisco, it's 80, 90 degrees, normal summer weather, in my opinion. So, even slight differences like that, if you're going to travel to anywhere that's on the coast, the weather is going to be very different than if you're more inland. And 70 degrees in Colorado feels very differently than 70 degrees in Texas. So pack layers and just be prepared.
Yeah, and check the weather in the destinations where you're going and look at what the averages are, the temperature averages during the times that you're going to be traveling there, and then bring a variety of things.
Which brings me to number 9 on our list, and that is laundry. We do not have a washer and dryer in our unit. Some of them do come with them. We did not get one for this unit. So we're heavily reliant upon laundromats. The ideal situation is what Disney has set up at Disney World. What is it? Wilderness
Fort
Camp?
Wilderness.
Fort
Yeah.
Wilderness. Thank you. You go in, you have your washing machines and you have your dryers. You tap your credit card, you pick which washer and dryer you're going to use, and it pays for everything through your card. So you don't have to look and scrounge for change and cash. But a lot of places still use the coin machine. So you're having to find an ATM, which isn't always available.
And if you do if money is no object, get an RV with a washer and dryer.
Get an RV. Yes, it is definitely one of those that you can have an add-on in. You can have it done through the RV company, or you can buy one on the side, because a lot of them have closets spaces for the washer and dryer. We just don't have that available in our RV.
My next thing that really surprised me about the RV was how little gas the generator uses. We use the generator pretty much all the time when we're driving, because that way our girls can watch TV on the TV behind us if they want to while we're driving.
We have to have the refrigerator on.
Yeah, our refrigerator is powered either by shore power, which is when you're plugged into a campground, or through the generator. So we had the generator on the entire time we were driving, and then we did camp one night at a Walmart parking lot when we couldn't find any available campgrounds, and we ran the generator all night there because it was a cold night and we needed the heat on. So I was surprised, though, that particular night, again, we'd been using the generator all day, and we just kept it on when we parked at the Walmart, and it ran all night. And I think we maybe used 2 gallons of gas.
It was surprising. We woke up, we're like, oh, let's brace for impact. There's a gas station right here. We'll be fine. And it's like, oh, it barely even moved.
Yeah, I mean, I'd made a point of filling up before we parked, so I knew going to bed that we had a full tank of gas, but I really had no idea what the gas gauge was going to look like in the morning, and I was pleasantly surprised because I could barely tell that it had moved at all. So that really surprised me in a pleasant way.
Yeah, in a very, very pleasant way. So it makes boondocking very easy to do.
And speaking of generators, I recently changed the oil on our generator, and I was surprised at just how easy it was. So if you haven't done that, or if you're thinking you're going to have to take it somewhere, check out that video. I'll put a link to that in the description below as well. But changing the generator oil, super easy, maybe 5 minutes at most. Anyway, these were the top 10 things that surprised us the most in buying our RV, which we did just a few months ago, and then heading out on the road for a month. If you're brand new to RVing, I bet some of these things would surprise you too, so hopefully you found these helpful. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up, and then smash that subscribe button and the bell notification button too. We're putting out at least 2 videos a week right now, and we'd love for you to join us on this journey. If you have a comment or a question, if something you'd like to see in a future video, leave that down below as well. But for now, we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks.